Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We are going to be continuing our series this morning that we've been looking at since, we had a delayed start. But this term we've been sort of living again the theme of living the Catholic faith with a focus on the bread of life. So this Sunday in particular, we are looking at a teaching that is core, that is central to our Catholic faith. It's the visible living that we do in the world of our faith. So for that task, I have asked one of our OCIA team members, David Zimmel, to offer a presentation today on this topic. And so please give him your attention this morning. David? This should be on.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Uh-oh. Cheryl, don't go too far. Not that I can...
Okay. This one right here. Should be. Oh, it helps when you have the remote plugged in.
Ha!
That's why.
Okay. Well, while that's getting started...
Operator error. There you go.
Hey.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, like Cheryl said, my name is David Zimmel, and I am giving what will hopefully be a brief presentation on Catholic social teaching today. I am part of a group called the People of Praise. We're here in Shreveport, and we have a little community just a hair to the west of us, right along Jordan Street. We do a little outreach, run a school, do neighborhood stuff. And that has given me an opportunity to meet lots and lots of people. And I hope to kind of throw a couple of stories in for how I've been able to apply some of this stuff. But for most of this material, I read these books this fall. So this is not something that I would say I'm a master of. It's something that I've tried to do a lot of, but it's something I'm still very much learning. And I'm hoping to kind of give you a feel for what I have learned, and a little bit of excitement about what that is. So my hope for this talk, this is a picture of the Oregon coast. Several years ago, I got to go on a big giant road trip. It was 6,800 miles. We started in Shreveport. We went up through Yellowstone, the Grand Tetons, Coeur d'Alene National Forest. And we stayed a night in Portland and then went along the coast. And as we were driving along the coast, my friend and roommate, Paul, he called his dad, who lives in Corvallis, and he said, "Hey, Dad, we're driving along the coast. We want to see whales. Where should we stop?" And he said, "Where are you?" We gave him the mile marker, and he said, "Oh, in 2 miles, you're going to want to pull over." And we were, you can see that bridge. We were driving along that road, and right at the end of that little bluff, there's a tiny little park. And he said, "Pull into the tiny little park, sit down on a bench, and just stare out into the ocean." We're like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah. Just stare out into the ocean. And don't look for whales. Look for a tiny mist that suddenly appears above the water. Look for the spray." So sure enough, we stop at the park. We sit on the bench. We look out at the ocean. We're just staring there. And there's dozens of people, all kinds of people coming. They're taking pictures. They're laughing. Nobody's doing what we're doing, which is just staring out into the ocean. And all of a sudden you see it. It's like a little pff, pff, pff. And here's a whole school of whales coming down from the north down to the south, maybe 10, 20 of them. And we get really excited. We're pointing. People don't care. They're still taking their pictures. "Oh, there's whales. Okay, cool." So Catholic social teaching is a little like a giant ocean. And there are really beautiful things out there. And part of my hope for this talk is that I can point. Be like, if you look over there, and look right like that, you might see something very beautiful. Okay. You can also look at what are some big themes going on within Catholic social teaching. These are big themes. One way to think about this would be like, if I have a pair of glasses, these are different lenses that I can look at what's actually being said. So things like respect for life and the dignity of the human person. All life is sacred. This is something we hold really foundational to our faith. And there are lots of ways in the modern age that this gets attacked. Things like abortion or euthanasia, war, and the death penalty. We are, as humanity, we are coming up with better and better ways to attack the dignity of human life. And so one thing that we can do as you look at all this material is you can look at it with these themes. It's like, okay, David said this was an important theme. How is what I am looking at right now another, part of this thing? I'm not a huge fan of reading PowerPoint presentations. If you do want me to read something or slow down, just raise your hand and be like, hey, David, don't go on to the next slide. I want to read this because it's awesome. Because a lot of this stuff is really awesome. We're also going to look at 3 documents in particular. The first of them is from the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council. Just in case, that's how big, that's the part of the Vatican Council that we're going to look at. There is kind of a zeroth document that we're not going to go, which is the Novum Regarum or something like that. It was a turn of the century. It's a beautiful document that's decades ahead of its time, but that kind of led to a lot of the main material here. The reason we're looking at these 3, when I looked over which are the biggest documents about this teaching, these are the 3 that get quoted the most. So it's like, okay, we'll look at those 3. And I asked Dr. Cheryl, what do you think of this? She said it was a good plan. And then when I got into it, I realized these are the first 3 documents the church has written to non-Catholics. Gaudium et Spes in particular came kind of organically out of the Second Vatican Council, and it was just to the whole world. So this is something the church has to say to the whole world, which is kind of interesting. I also think Catholic teaching is terrific. The more I get into this stuff, the better it is. And you can study it your whole life and still never really understand all of it. So my hope, once again, is just to kind of briefly overview some of these things, point out some main themes. If you do have questions, if stuff doesn't make sense, I don't mind if you interrupt me or if you stand up and get more coffee. And you can remember, all of our teaching comes from the 3 foundational elements of our faith. So it comes from the magisterium and what the magisterium teaches about sacred scripture and sacred tradition, and all of that is based on Jesus. So if you're ever wondering, where is this? There's going to be quotes from the Bible. There's going to be quotes from church fathers. Once again, I'm not going to try to, this is not a complete explanation of everything that the church teaches. This is a brief summary. And it's worth knowing this is not to the U.S. of A. This is not the Catholic Church and what they have to say to us in the U.S. It's what they have to say to everybody in the whole world, and we're a part of that. So if there is stuff that feels kind of, I don't think that really meshes with my experience, that's okay. You could imagine if you were tasked with saying something to the whole world that's both true and helpful, what would I say? And I would run and hide. That is a really challenging topic. This is an impossible question. And we have books of things to say about it. It's really wonderful. So if there is stuff that's a little challenging, I encourage you to grapple with it. It is a beautiful and difficult and wonderful and helpful topic. Okay. Everybody with me? Round 1. So Gaudium et Spes was published in 1965. Like I said, it came out of the Second Vatican Council, and its audience is everybody, all of humanity. It has a basic structure, which is to say, here's what the church teaches. Here's our theology. Here's how we understand the human person, for example. Man is social, therefore society matters. It's a very interesting way of looking at the world, where it's not, here's what we observe. It's like, no, here's what Revelation has given us, and here's what that has to do with our society, with our life. So, for example, man's activity in the world talks about the different things we do in the world, our work and the dignity of our work, all the different interpersonal organizations, politics, societies. It's like, what do we do with that? Well, here's what the church teaches about those kind of activities, and here's how we're going to respond to it. And then it also includes the role of the church. We really do think that the church has a role in the modern age. This is good news for all of us. It's like, yeah, the church is an important part of even a secular society. We have a role to play. In particular, we know the truth. We have a lot of really valuable things to say and point out, and we're a keeper of this vast tradition of very helpful and inspired information. And there's a certain sense of urgency with the document. That's why I included this quote. One of the big challenges of the modern age is that things are getting less human, and this is one of the big ideas that pops up within Gaudium et Spes, is we need to focus on the human person, because God created this human person, but it's under attack. Like, the dignity of the human person is not a guaranteed thing that will persist. I mean, it will persist, but we might destroy it as humanity. And it could get really bad if we're not careful. That's my very brief paraphrase of that beautiful quote. Part 1 goes through the big theology, the big overview of all of humanity. Part 2 really looks at some urgent problems of the modern age. Once again, this is 1965, and if this feels like it's about today, that's because the church regularly does this. They give these prescient, here's what's going on, and then, oh my gosh, this is happening today. Marriage in the family is a big, urgent problem. Not that it's actually a great thing, getting married, having a family, but it's not happening the way that it used to, and that's a huge issue for our world. And you can look at that, you can read articles about it, 50% of people are getting divorced. 75% of kids are raised in families where the parents are not married. It's like, this is really bad in America, but it's bad for the whole world, and it's bad for our society. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. Let's see. Let me find my notes. It's also worth pointing out, this is looking at what's happening right now, which is to say, for the first time in history, you have 1900 years that none of this stuff has really gone anywhere, and all of a sudden, all of our economic and social values are up for debate. So what do we do about that? And I can look, you guys are looking at me like I'm going to give you the answer. No, I am not. A lot of these answers are unsummarizable in the sense of, like, even if I put all the quote up here and read it, we would still have to spend hours tackling what it actually means. That's why we put the big themes up at the beginning. So you can go back and think of those themes. So you can imagine, okay, where are these in some of this stuff? In particular, Gaudium et Spes introduces two big concepts. These are two very helpful ideas about how we look at the world and how we think it ought to go. How many people have ever heard, subsidiary? I misspelled that word. Subsidiarity. There should be a T in there. Sorry. Oh, subsidiary. Okay. In my notes, it's subsidiarity. All right, that's fine. How many people have heard these terms before? Okay. How many people can apply them to their life? We have a very honest group of people in this room. Subsidiarity is basically an organizational principle such that the lowest or least competent authority should solve a problem. Or to quote the Catechism, a community of higher orders should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its function, but should rather support it in case of need and to help coordinate it with the larger society. And of course, always with a view to the common good. In other words, this, in general, somebody up here telling somebody down here what to do is not all that helpful. And if this person knows how to run their own life, then they should be the ones deciding their own life. So one example of this is in the confessional, where it's like somebody shows up to the priest, he says, these are my sins, he confesses them, and the priest gives him absolution, and they deal with it right there. The priest doesn't have to go to the bishop. How do you deal with this problem? If something comes up that's not exactly within Catholic teaching, the priest can interpret that and help this person right there. That's one example. Does this make sense? Okay. Once again, these are big themes. And this is, you might think, oh my gosh, this is a pretty wide-reaching theme. Like, if we ran our country like this, that might be better. And that's exactly true. In fact, this is one of the things the church is doing. It's like, if you design things like this, it goes a little better. If you set things up like this is a way for life to work very well. And it's based in Scripture, it's based in church teaching, it's based in the life of the apostles. It's wonderful. Solidarity shows up as one of the big themes. We are all one giant family. God is our Father. We are all brothers and sisters in Christ. These are quotes from the Bible. This is a profound reality of what's going on. Jesus says, how can you do that to that person? That person is your brother. We got to forgive each other. This is a deep connection that we all share. And it's not just because we're part of the same church. It's because we're human. There are different movements throughout history where this comes into play. There is a solidarity movement in Eastern Europe that's really interesting and worth studying. One of my roommates, his dad was in Poland for several years, and the Polish solidarity movement is a fascinating political group. I'm not going to talk more about it. There's cool stuff out there. I first learned about this concept when one of my friends had cancer, and we all shaved our heads. It's like, okay, she's losing her hair, so we're all going to lose our hair. And that's what you do. This is me and you together, going through this together. I help teach at a local grade school. When kids we go like this, and everybody's, yes, I'm with you. Or it's like, everybody's with me? People are tracking? Excellent. Okay. At the end, we might do like a quiz. How do you experience this? What's an example of solidarity in your life? I'm kidding. All right, moving on to document number 2. Oh, look at that. Hidden gems within the PowerPoint. These are ways this sometimes comes up in our modern society. All right, the Compendium of Social Doctrine of the Catholic Church. I'm going to use social doctrine, social teaching interchangeably. I find the teaching to be just a more useful term than doctrine in English. Compendium. This is a really interesting word. Does anyone else know what other major church document is a compendium? I didn't. I had to look it up. Bingo. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is a compendium. It's one way to say it is it's a list, but it's not just any list. It's a complete, concise list. Unlike this talk, which will be an incomplete, probably drawn out talk, a compendium is a complete, concise collection of material. And this document, while being very interesting, is a little, it doesn't have the same tone of Gaudium et Spes. Gaudium et Spes is written kind of as a letter or an ode. It's very easy to read. The compendium is pretty dense, and it kind of goes from one topic to another topic without a lot of. There's no connecting sentences. It's like, here's what we say about this, here's what we say about that, and the topics themselves are pretty connected, and all the material is pretty connected, but it's not written like a novel, which is another way of saying you can go and you can look it up and be like, I actually want to know what the church teaches on a particular topic. Bam, I can find it. In fact, all these are just for free online on the Vatican website. If you just search Compendium of Social Doctrine, it will be number 1 on Google. And it will bring you to a little thing, and everything's hyperlinked. So if you want to click on any of the parts, for example, the church's mission, Bink, you click on it, it brings you right to that page. Pretty cool. It's amazing that the Vatican has all this stuff for free. This was commissioned by Saint Pope John Paul II. At the turn of the century, he realized, oh my gosh, the church has all this teaching and it's not collected anywhere. A lot of people think that Catholic social teaching is new. That's not actually very accurate. It's only newly written. It's like, here's the collection of everything we've taught for the last 2,000 years on this particular topic. And that's a cool quote. All right. It has 3 main parts. The first part, these are my descriptors, theology. It goes through what the church teaches in terms of its theology of Catholic social teaching. So, God's plan for humanity, the church's mission, who is the human person. It has these beautiful principles of the church's doctrine. It's pretty fascinating. The general approach is, once again, here's what the church teaches, here's what the church fathers teach, here's what more church fathers have to say about what those church fathers teach. It's just huge lists of these really beautiful quotes. And if you read through it, everything is bookmarked or hyperlinked and footnoted. It's great. One thing I really love, every section has a little section on love. And love is clearly the most important part of Catholic social doctrine. So if you're ever wondering, how can I summarize Catholic social document in one word? It's like love. Love God, love your neighbor. Bam, there it is. The whole law and the prophets are summarized just like this. It also introduces several principles. These principles are really cool. The principle of the common good. This is based in some teaching by Thomas Aquinas, which is that you can look at society and you can add up all the goods, all the common goods, and we always want to work for the greatest common good. So what social condition is going to do the most good for the most people? And if you're thinking about this, you might think, oh my gosh, I can think of lots of fun intellectual puzzles where this goes wrong. It's like, well, you got to remember, we're talking about good in lieu of the church's mission. So we're talking about fulfillment, salvation. And it's good that has to be common. So things that interact with all people. Education, food, the ability to self-determine. These are goods that are common. But when you do that, you can add them up and you can say, okay, which one of these 2 options is better? This is a principle used to help people analyze what to do in the world. Does that make sense? And each of these are the same sort of principles. So we've already talked about subsidiarity and solidarity. The universal destination of goods. All creation is a gift from God. And so its end destination is all of us. We got to make sure it gets there. We don't want to be hoarding the things that God has given us. And participation. This is one that showed up recently in the Synod on synodality. We are called to participate. This is something that's really important to being a Catholic, being a part of our society. This includes all parts of our society, the cultural parts, the economic parts, the political parts, the social parts, the civil parts. It's like society is a rich and deep thing, and we're all connected in the middle of it. And it's important that we participate rather than just, I don't care about society. It's all going to hell, I'm checking out. It's like, no, we're checked in. This is a big part of what we're doing. It also has another section, so these are fundamental principles. There's also one section where it's fundamental values. The fun distinction between a principle and a value. But truth, freedom, and justice. You might remember a talk from a couple of weeks ago where Dr. Cheryl talked at length about justice and what true justice is. It's not just people getting what they deserve. It's all of creation oriented in the right order of God. At least that's my one-sentence version. Okay, good. Yes. And of course, love is the most important. It's the foundation. It's the ideal. And in a lot of cases, it's the thing we're actually doing. It's great. When in doubt, always just go back to love. Section 2 is on our environments. One quick note, when I use the word environment for the whole purpose of this talk, unless it's specified, I'm not talking about the environment. I'm talking about environment more generally than that. So if I'm out in the woods, my environment is the environment. But if I'm here, my environment is this room, it's this building, it's this city. And every place we find ourselves has an environment. So the second part of the Catholic social teaching is just to go through all of our different environments and how the theology applies to each environment. Does that make sense? No? Maybe? Okay. Some of these are also a little summarizable. So, for example, the family is the most important part of society. It's almost a direct quote. Work is good and fundamental to society. That's almost a direct quote. These other ones, they are not summarizable. I was hoping to have like a really punchy, here's what the church has to say on the international community and how it relates to the war in Gaza and Israel right now. It's like, oh my gosh. It's like, this paragraph indicates this. And it's a very nuanced, very complete, very precise. At every point, it's like this. It's going back to the Bible and church teaching, and like, here's what we have to say on this topic, and it's very precise. And once again, it's hyperlinked. So if you do want to go and look at it, like you're about to have a conversation with somebody, and you want to be able to know what the church teaches on this topic, you can search compendium for social doctrine in the Catholic Church. You can click on the link, and it's like, and here's the 4 paragraphs that completely summarize what the church teaches. It's awesome. I included this picture. This is a picture of a group of Hutterite kids up in Canada. And I love the Hutterite community. It's this fascinating Anabaptist community that started in Eastern Europe and then has been persecuted for the last 400 years and now exists. There's thousands of them up in northern United States, North Dakota, South Dakota, southern Canada. And they live completely communally, and they capture a lot of these things. They talk a lot about family, the importance of human work. They're pacifists, and as a result of being pacifists, they've been persecuted because they refuse to fight. They refuse to get conscripted. So the government that they're living in will say, you have to be conscripted, and they'll say, no, we'll just go to a new country. Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, thank you, Deacon. This is a great lead into my next slide. What do we actually do with this? So part 2 is how do we use the theology to understand our environments? Part 3 is how do we use the theology and how it impacts our environments to actually do something? And it goes through the 2 huge roles. So the role of the church and the role of the laity. So the church in particular, one of the biggest things it does is it tells people what it teaches. It thinks the Catholic social teaching is terrifically useful, and so it shares it openly, and in some cases, people don't like Catholic social teaching always, and so they're like, hey, the church gets persecuted for saying what it thinks is true, what we know to be the truth, and that's a big part of what the church sees as its role in society. Similarly, there is a role for the laity. This is my favorite part, because this is what all of us are doing, for the most part. Father Rainey isn't here, so all of us, we have a role to play in what the church teaches. And while I think these two quotes capture it quite a bit, I included them in their entirety because they are deep and kind of mysterious. Like, what does it mean for us to be reborn as new men and women, both sanctified and sanctifiers? Like both those who are being saved and those who are participating in God's saving act in the world, immersed in the mystery of God and inserted into society. Just, wow, what a vision for what our role is in the world. And then it's, okay, go do it. So now everybody knows what to do, right? It's interesting, the Compendium of Social Doctrine ends with this broad call for all of Christians to preach the gospel, and it says almost nothing about what preaching the gospel actually looks like. Except that it keeps coming back to love. And in fact, we have a lot to offer just with that. People in the modern age are deeply looking for more meaning in their life. I lived with a guy, and he became a Christian just because he was on a quest for meaning. He's like, I think Christianity provides the best answer to what the heck I should do in the world. But if we're really going to talk about preaching the gospel, we should talk about it. And if we're going to talk about it, we need to have a synod, because that's the way the church decides what it teaches. And so there is a synod on the new evangelization. How do we do evangelization? And this happened to coincide with Benedict stepping down and Pope Francis getting elected. And so the first thing that Pope Francis does as soon as he shows up on the scene is he summarizes and writes this apostolic exhortation, the joy of the gospel, Evangelii Gaudium. So while I haven't read the other two and studied them deeply, I actually have read Evangelii Gaudium a bunch. One of my roles within our community is I'm a missionary, so I go around and talk to people. And so when this came out, we studied it. We read every word. We talked about it. I have a spreadsheet kind of breaking all the sections down. It is awesome. I love this document. It's very helpful. It's very practical. I recommend reading all three of these documents. If you're like me and you don't like reading very much, I'd say start with this one. It's very easy to read. It's very short. This is my printout of it. You can print it out for free. You can buy it for a couple of bucks. It begins, so like the other two were written for all of humanity, Evangelii Gaudium is written for all Christians. So it's a little narrower of an audience. And so he starts by inviting every Christian everywhere in the world right now, renew your relationship with Christ. I was talking with some of the guys I live with, and one of them has it on his Kindle. And when you have books on your Kindle, they can say, do other people highlight this verse, this sentence? And this is the most highlighted sentence in the whole book. Everybody thinks this is an awesome sentence. So I included it. All right, and I'm going to try to go through this still pretty quickly. It's broken down into 5 main chunks. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. And a lot of the stuff in Evangelii Gaudium is stuff you could say to somebody of another Christian denomination, and they would be like, yeah, that's in the Bible. That's true. I believe that. So these are the 5 sections. I'm going to go through each one at a time and just kind of give a couple of brief little points. But here's all of them all at once. Okay. The church's missionary transformation. Being evangelistic is at the very heart and core of what it means to follow Jesus. It's true for the apostles. It's true for the all the early Christians, all the writings, all the teachings of the church. Preaching the gospel, that's what we do. It's the one thing Jesus commands us to do after the resurrection. Baptize people, preach the gospel. I guess that's 2 things. I included this quote just for that last line. It's a great quote. People like to reference it. The smell of the sheep in particular people talk a lot about that quote. Evangelization consists mostly of patience and the disregard for the constraints of time. A couple of weeks ago, there was a young lady who drove by a couple of our houses and asked for help paying her electric bill. And every year we set aside some of our money into like an alms account for us to take care of stuff like this. And we have money in it. So we said, yeah, go ahead and swing by later. She didn't have time to talk right then. She came by later in the afternoon, and we sat on one of our porches and just talked with her about what her need was. And it was this summer, there was a tree that had fallen on her mom's house. They had spent all their money getting the roof fixed, and then the landlord had evicted them. They were getting into a new house, but as a result of this turnover, there was like $1,000 unpaid on her electric bill that they would need to fix before she could move into a new place. And she had been to every single social service in the entire city, and, she had gotten it down to like $500. Hey, is there any way you can help me with this? So we sat and started talking with her. And when I approach conversations like this, I'm always, you never know what's going to happen. It's like, I need to figure out a way, how can I get the money from my account into the electrical account? Jesus says when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So I kind of want it to be secret, but I can't because she needs to know I'm doing this. So there's some negotiating that needs to happen. But pretty soon it became clear her primary reason for being there was not to get help for her electric bill. She wanted to talk about what was going on in her family. And her family has been connected to our neighborhood for years. I've actually met a number of her brothers and sisters and kin. And just January 2022, so a little under 2 years ago, 2 of her cousins were in a grocery store. They got into an argument. They both pulled out guns and shot each other, and one of them died. And it was terrible. It was 6 blocks away from where I live. It was really just a bizarre, why? And she wanted to talk about it. And here's what's been going on in my family because of this. And here's how we've encountered the Lord. And here's, what people are dealing with. And it was this amazing moment. And we talked with her for about an hour and 20 minutes. And she's crying. We're praying together. It's, I don't know what's going on. In the end, we do help her a little with her electric bill. But she leaves and she is just smiling and full of life, and just thank you so much for talking and praying with me. It's like, okay, if you ever get into a situation where things are just taking really long, that's why I like that last sentence. But our world today is very complex. One thing I really like, when Pope Francis introduces this topic, he says, in today's day and age, we are always being told what's wrong with the world. In fact, we're overwhelmed with analysis of what's wrong with the world. And this is a very difficult way to, everybody's talking about the problem, nobody's talking about the solution. But as people who preach the gospel, we do have to have an analysis of what's actually happening in the world. Interestingly enough, the way he deals with it is very much within the principle of subsidiarity. He's saying, here's some things I see, and here's how you might be able to apply them, but fundamentally, you're the right people for the job. You're the right people to understand your own situation. But we do have to watch out for diagnostic overload. And the problems are really, really deep. This is a picture from a recent protest in Belarus. There was a bunch of, right before the Ukraine war, there was an election. The elections were probably corrupt, and millions of people took to the streets afterward to protest the current president of Belarus. It's like, these people don't have a voice, and that shows up in the economy of exclusion, the inequality that leads to violence. In fact, you can look at news headlines and just kind of tag them to all these different things. And of course, urban culture. For the first time in all of history, we have more people living in cities than not living in cities. This is a huge impact in how we think and live and deal with one another. And it's not just, once again, and these are environments. This isn't environmental in the sense of the environment. We'll get to that. This is all the different environments. But challenges are not just environmental, they're personal. We have a hard time being Christians. And the world the world is pushing in on us and causing us to lose our faith and our zeal and our vigor. I enjoyed the parallel between those two pictures, the women in Belarus protesting the election and these two young women struggling with the challenge of dealing with today. There's some really wonderful stuff here. If you want to get to the real meat, like how can I renew my life? This particular chapter, this one, like the other one, it's hyperlinked. You can go right to it. For example, maintaining our missionary spirituality. We got to watch out for relativism. This is a big deal in society. Cheryl went on a wonderful tangent a couple weeks ago on relativism. We got to be aware that as we're preaching, we can be selfish. We can succumb to sloth. And we want immediate results. Our society is always saying we got to get it done right now, today, right away. And the kingdom of God takes time. It takes a lot of time. And usually the first 100 years of a good movement look like failure. Like Jesus, his beginning looked like failure. And that's the guy we're following. If we're going to follow him, we can expect criticism. We can expect something that looks like failure. If we're lucky, we might even get crucified. All right. But we need to proclaim the gospel. The whole point of this apostolic exhortation is to give people a window into how to preach the gospel, what it looks like. And this is something that everybody does. So once again, the Compendium of Catholic Doctrine says the laity have this huge role to play, and that's true. This is us. Everybody proclaims the gospel. There's some stuff in here about how to write a homily, which is awesome, but all of us are constantly encountering situations where a little homily, 1 minuter, would really help this situation. I also just love this quote. You can see how it's all tied together. All right. if you were to ask somebody, what is Catholic social teaching all about, you would probably have somebody tell you, oh, it's about helping the poor. And it's worth knowing this is kind of a final offshoot of the fundamental core, which is you got the human person, you have the gospel, but people have a social dimension. And this is really interesting. So if you're going to preach the gospel, it's got to include the whole person. You're not just, it is enough that Jesus saves them, but tomorrow they still need to eat. And sometimes those two things are very connected. So there's some really fascinating stuff in here. I highlighted these 4, he calls them principles. I don't know what they are. They're like mysterious sayings. When I encountered them the first time, I just put giant question marks, kept reading, and didn't think about them much. I find they're really helpful. You kind of think about them and you help. It's a way to look at the world. A couple of years ago, I was dealing with a young man. He lived right next to me. I call him Tony. And he got in fights every single day of his life. He was just always getting in fights with everybody. And he lived 4 houses and around a corner from me. And so the fights would like spill out onto the street. And I was regularly having to call the cops and break up stuff. It was not helpful. So I got to talk to Tony about getting reconciled with people. Because all he wants to do is fight. And he would even tell me, it's like I meet somebody and we draw a line. You don't come on this side, I don't come on that side. That's the only way we're going to be friends. It's like, that is not friendship, man. And so I was thinking and praying about how to introduce the topic of reconciliation to Tony. And he calls me. I was driving home and he called me and he said, David, I'm going to kill him. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, one of your guys. He dissed my girl. I'm going to kill him. I was like, what are you talking? So I was, well, do you think you could hold off killing him until I get back to the house? He's like, yeah, I could do that. So I get back and we talk. And sure enough, one of the guys that I live with had dissed his girlfriend. We had an empty lot and we let them park their car on our empty lot because they didn't have a parking space. And the road had a curb and their car was a low rider. And it would hit the curb every single time it drove onto the lot. And it was scraping the rails on the bottom of the car. And so he had, his girlfriend had asked my roommate, would you be willing to take out the curb and make it smooth? And my roommate, knowing the law, is like, I can't damage, that's the city's curb. I can't take out the city's curb. If you want, there is a lot you could park up there, that doesn't have a curb. Maybe that one would work. But what she heard was, go and solve your own problem, woman. It didn't come off quite the same way. And so what he heard was him insulting his girlfriend. And I talked to this guy. He's like, I don't think I did anything wrong, but if it will help, I'd be happy to apologize. So we went over. He apologized. They forgave us. It's like, we actually can't solve this problem, but at least you can still park there. You could also park there, but you don't have to. Your choice. Please don't shoot anybody. And then the next morning, he gives me another call, and he said, David, I got to thinking about what you did, and I thought I'd give it a try. It's like, oh, no. Like, he knows nothing about, he's like, yeah, you came over, you apologized, and so I figured, I'm going to go talk to this guy that I have a problem with. It's like, no. It's like, yeah, because his dog's been coming onto my property and barking at my dog and peeing on my property, and it's like, oh, I've got to kill him. I was like, okay. But it turns out it worked. As soon as he had seen how we interacted, he went over and talked to the guy, and it turned out he was in the wrong. And, so he, rather than demanding an apology, which was what he wanted to do, he apologized. And that when I was preparing for this talk, that story came to mind as it gets at some of these things. Oftentimes when we run into problems, when we're dealing with difficult situations, we want to fix them. We want to force the problem along itself. But Christ's solutions take time, and time is more important than space. It's more important than getting our own solution fixed in. Unity can prevail over conflict. And if you want peace, you got to talk. I'm not going to do questions on this slide because we could talk for the whole time about this. And of course, we need to be filled with the Holy Spirit. A big part of what we're doing is God acting in the world. And one of the big things the Catholic Church has to offer is our devotion to Mary. This is actually really helpful for all Christians, that we have a deep respect and love of Mary. And the Pope Francis has a real devotion to Mary, and whenever I can, I like to, he has a real insight into how her spirituality can change and have an impact on us. All right, there it is, all three documents. How's everybody doing? We'll get there. This is the next slide. We're going to go through misconceptions about Catholic social teaching. My dad really likes comic strips, and so no PowerPoint that I make would be complete without a comic strip. I find this is a little bit of what it's like to have a misconception about Catholic social teaching, because Catholic social teaching is free. It's online. You can look it up. You can go to the Vatican website. You can go to the U.S. Catholic Bishop's website. It's all there. It's very clear. But sometimes we choose to willfully ignore what's actually there. All right, so we're going to go through a couple of these. But people are doing well? We don't need to stand up and stretch? Get more coffee? Okay, that was a rousing nod. All right. We need to do it within approved church organizations. This is true, right? We gotta, it's only good if we're doing it through the church. Truth is, we can help anybody, anywhere, anytime, anyhow. We can do it in political groups, in social groups. It takes a lot of discernment. This is not something that's just, every good thing that we do is a good thing. It's like, no. But we can do good things in almost everywhere that we are. I love this quote from Gaudium et Spes. I'm pretty sure this is the one, if you were on Kindle, this is probably one of the most popular quotes. Let people read it for a second. All right, so misconception quelled. We know that. All right, number 2. This is my personal weakness. Helping people should be efficient. I studied, I have a degree in civil engineering, and whenever I start helping people, it's like, man, if only I could do this while expending less energy. Not true. In fact, if we're really going to be loving people, it's usually inefficient. Everybody who's a parent knows that this is true. Raising kids is not an exercise in efficiency. And it's like the fundamental metaphor for how God wants us to interact with society. It's how he relates to us, and it's how we want to relate to other people. Just in case anybody's wondering, this Romano Guardini guy, this is somebody the Pope quotes several times in Evangelii Gaudium. When I read it the first time, I knew nothing about him. I've been reading one of his books recently that I just love, and it's awesome. If anybody wants to learn more about it, I'd love to share post. But he has some really interesting analysis of what's going on in the world. One of the big things that Pope Francis keeps getting at with Evangelii Gaudium is that we're always trying to solve things really quickly. And evangelism is something that takes a lot of time. And it's something that happens at it's an integral part of our life. So one thing I'm trying to do is just kind of, hey, if I think about my whole life, how's this going to go? How could I preach the gospel at every moment of my life? All right. This is my personal favorite. This is probably the one I get most often. Pope Francis is a communist liberal. Turns out Jesus is way older than communism. And this is, it's just not true. They have things to say about our political parties, but fundamentally, the church is neither Republican or Democrat, just like Jesus is neither Republican or Democrat. We want Christians in communities throughout the world to offer a radiant and attractive witness of fraternal communion. We can do that, maybe. All right. But talking about politics is always a little dangerous, so disclaimer. The Catholic social teaching does have a few things to say on the topic. It's not very much. And if you'll remember the big themes, it goes back to what's the common good? How do we deal with the most people in the best possible way? And having different ideas about how to do that is really helpful. And so you'll often hear the church talk about the importance of dialogue and the importance of listening and the importance of taking the other person's opinion seriously, because maybe that person has a kernel of what God wants for the whole of society. And I can't just dismiss the person because I ideologically disagree with him. And if we're going to fight something, let's fight corruption. That's the thing we really don't want. We need to live righteously. All right. So there it is. All of Catholic social teaching. We just did it. What do we do with this? This is a picture that I took from the Sea of Galilee, looking at these cliffs. It's a beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to go to Israel, I encourage you to do it. If you're zooming out in the world of where are we in the fundamental message of the gospel, we have God created us, we totally messed it up and fell into sin, Jesus saved us, and we respond to that salvation. We're in part 4, we're in the response. This is us responding freely with what God has done for us. And I would encourage you to, this might be, some of this stuff might be new ideas or challenging, but it's like, do whatever God is leading you to do. Kind of like the way Father Rainey was, here are 6 good things you can do for Advent. Our life is full of good opportunities, so be led by the Spirit. All right, step 0. It's not step 1, it's something we do every day. Remember that quote from Pope Francis? I added the full quote this time. No one should think that this invitation is not meant for him or her, since no one is excluded from the joy brought by the Lord. If you're interested also, we could talk more about Henry Tanner. He's a fascinating African-American painter. Just really interesting insight into what it means to be a Christian. All right, step 1. Where should we go? The gospel is preached to the poor. We always go to the margins. This, by the way, is a picture of Christ in the wilderness. I like this picture in terms of thinking about how do we respond, because Jesus, this is one of the big things he did in the desert. What do I do? How am I gonna decide how to do my mission? So, what the heck is a margin? Where are the margins? Oftentimes, the first time I heard this, I thought it had to do with just, the poor people who live on the south side of the downtown with all the homeless shelters and all the food banks. It's like, I know where the margins are if I go to the city of Shreveport. One of my 4-mile run route runs right by 3 camping spots. And Bobby is one of the guys on my running route. And so it's fun. Every day that I run, I can check up on him and be like, hey, how you doing, Bobby? It's like there is a spot in our city that's kind of a marginal spot. But this is true of every part of our life. Like, where are the margins of this room? Who's on the fringes? Who's on the edge of my family? Maybe over Thanksgiving we experienced, oh yeah, my younger brother, nobody really likes him. Or they love him, but he doesn't have a way of fitting in the way everybody else does. This is a big part of how we respond. We want to start with the people who are the lost sheep, the people furthest out. And this is just straight out of the Bible. The Old Testament, the New Testament, Jesus, the church, everybody says, when we get to the day of judgment, we are going to be judged not by how many awesome things we did, by how we treated poor people and widows and orphans and all the people who couldn't repay us. The church has the acts of mercy. It's like visiting people in prison. Okay, so that's where we should go. We can go everywhere. We can preach the gospel at every part of our lives, but we want to start with the margins. If you have a choice between a person who can repay you and a person who can't repay you, give it to the person who can't repay you. Step number 2. Francis introduces these 2 topics into Evangelii Gaudium, but they are everywhere in church teaching: accompaniment and encounter. These are complex and rich ways of looking at our apostolic efforts. Part of what it means to be a Christian is to encounter God. And part of what it means to preach the gospel is for the person we're talking to have an encounter of God. I remember I was having a group of young men over to my house, and a neighbor knocked on my door and asked me for a banana. And then halfway I get to the kitchen, he's like, oh yeah, can you get me some cereal too? And so I bring out a banana and a cereal, and he's this big, has this just beautiful deep bass voice. He's like, okay guys, you're sitting here meeting with David. You must be Christians. Tell me a story about Jesus. Where have you seen Jesus? And these 3 guys, I had been trying to get them to share about their internal experience of the Lord for weeks, and nothing would get through. But as soon as he asked that question, they started telling these beautiful stories about how they had encountered the Lord. One was a prayer time on the top of a mountain. Another was at a camp down south where they had done some Eucharistic adoration. And the third was the day before, where this kid, unbeknownst to me, had decided he was going to stop doing illegal drugs and had experienced this huge flood of the Holy Spirit. It's like, this is something that is part of what it means to be a Christian, is encountering the Lord. And we want to focus on those encounters rather than say, here's everything that is true. It's like, no, we're encountering a person. And you get to know that person over time. Which is why the second half of this, accompaniment, is so important. We're not just encountering somebody and then going our separate way, they're done. It's like, no, we're walking with somebody along the way. The picture in the background is Jesus on the way to Emmaus. It's like, here are 2 of his own disciples who were there for the resurrection. They encountered the risen Lord, and they walked away. What are they doing? They're going the wrong way, and Jesus just walks with them for hours. It's like, why did he do it that way? I mean, why did he wait for hours before he's like, hey guys? I met a guy named RJ several years ago. I met him on his 50th birthday. I had just moved to the city of Indianapolis and was just kind of going around the neighborhood getting introduced to people that we knew. RJ was very, very sick. He had throat cancer, and the doctors had told him 3 years earlier that he had about 6 months to live. But he really wanted to live to be 50. So by sheer force of will, he was 50 years old, and we celebrated his birthday. He ate ice cream, which is the only thing he could eat, as his gums were totally, his teeth were totally gone, and he could barely talk. But over the next several weeks, we would visit RJ every week just because of how sick he was, every day sometimes. And I remember one moment in particular, we're in his house, he wasn't in a wheelchair, and then he was in a bed, and he could no longer get out of bed much. So we were emptying his bedpan, we were changing his sheets, and at one point I'm holding his sheets, and we look, and he's got this beautiful picture of Jesus up above his bed. And the young woman I'm with, she's like, RJ, that's a really cool picture of Jesus. And RJ's like, that's me. That's a picture of me. And it's true. Like, turns out he did look a lot like Jesus. He was very, very dark skin, had these beautiful black dreadlocks, big smile, open eyes. It's like, turns out, like Mother Teresa often says, when we care for people, we're caring for Jesus. And it was a beautiful thing to accompany him all the way to the last hours of his life. Step 3, pray with and for people. A couple of months ago, one of the guys I live with was out on a run in the morning, and one of our neighbors hailed him. And he was a little apprehensive because this guy is a talker, loves to talk. It's like, well, there goes my exercise for the day. But this guy had another guy that Evan did not recognize, and he said, you got to talk to this guy. He's in trouble. So Evan stopped what he was doing and started talking with this guy. And it turns out we knew a lot of his family, but not him. And he was in this really, he had a house, but he needed to fix it up, and it was falling apart, and he had some financial trouble, and his dad was really sick, and he was going through all this stuff. And Evan starts thinking about all the, what is the thing that's most important to do? We could help this guy fix his house. I don't know if that, what does he want? What's really going to help him? And all of a sudden he's like, well, what if we said a quick prayer right now? And so, it's 6:30 in the morning, and they just stand, hold hands, pray. And this guy just starts weeping. It's like, oh, I haven't prayed in months. This is so good. And he just starts talking about how much he's like, this is what I need to do. I need to be praying every day. This is really going to help me. And the guy who talks, turns out, didn't say and he's just like, yes, we got him. He's all about this. Turns out, this is something we can do with everybody. We can always be praying with people. If we're ever stuck, if you ever encounter a situation you don't know what to do with, it's like this is a secret weapon that we have. We can pray with people. One of my friends is a foot surgeon, and he said he's done over 5,000 foot surgeries. And every time he does a foot surgery, he offers to the person he's doing a foot surgery for, can we pray with you before we start the surgery? And he said, David, I can count on 2 fingers the number of people who have said no. It's like everybody wants prayer. Okay. There it is. There's some discussion questions. What am I doing every day, every week to renew my relationship with Jesus? Who are all the people at the margins of my life? All the different environments that I find myself. And what do I already do to accompany and to encounter people? What could I do to do that more? Questions? That was exactly an hour. Thank you for bearing with me. If people do want all the quotes that I gave, I could send this. I have all the things I quoted written up. I could probably get a photocopy and send it to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good. I also don't mind sharing the PowerPoint with everyone too. I'd be happy to do that. Okay. Thank you so much, David. You really brought some wonderful insights. I'm going to ask, I'm going to ask David to leave. I'm going to ask the OCIA team and our OCIA inquirers to go over to the library and have some time together. You've got probably maybe 20, 30 minutes at least to go and have some time as a group. And the rest of us can stay for more coffee or more conversation. I will tell you that next week we will be back here in this space together as a group, as a large group. The topic next week we'll be looking at the Trinity and the Eucharist. We're going to be tying the three persons of the Trinity back to that theme of the bread of life. So I'm going to do that next Sunday. And then on Sunday the 17th is when, if you were already at 8 o'clock Mass, you heard the announcement about the living creche that we're having and the pancake breakfast between the Masses. But Father Rainey will also be doing a presentation that morning, a briefer one, but a presentation on the Incarnation that I think will be a continuation of his mission that he's going to do on December the 10th. So some good stuff coming up, and then we break for 2 weeks and come back after the new year. Can you believe that the year is already? I mean, it's hard to believe, isn't it? Okay, so 2 things before you leave. For those of you that don't already have the book that Father Rainey suggested, and actually the cathedral purchased for everyone, This Is My Body. We have that up here. This is from Bishop Barron. And also from Bishop Barron, for everyone, we have these Advent Gospel meditations. So please take one of each. And unless you've already taken the This Is My Body, please take one. Unless you've already taken one, okay? But these are brand new. These just came in. Advent just begins today, okay? All right, guys. I'll see you next week. Thank you.